Well, you say for whatever reason, there's a lot of speculation out there about that. There was one of your colleagues had written a letter going into the speaker vote, essentially saying if you have basically if you got any skeletons in the closet, we need to know about it, and you need to, you don't need to put yourself up for leadership. A lot of rumors out there, but it started to bubble into like mainstream press. I saw a Washington Post story speculating that McCarthy perhaps had an inappropriate relationship with a somebody that wasn't his wife, essentially. So it was that. Do you think that played a role in any of this?
Hard to tell. When you're on the House floor, you get to observe interactions amongst people, and clearly Kevin McCarthy and Renee Elmers of North Carolina are friendly. But you know what? Kevin McCarthy and Renee Elmers are friendly with most all congressmen on the House floor.
Sure.
And so I never saw anything personally that would substantiate that rumor. I've also had my staff try to track it down to see if there are any real hard facts to go by.
Mm-hmm.
But everything is gossipy and rumor millish, and no one that I'm aware of has ever publicly said anything that would indicate that they were involved in that kind of inappropriate relationship. But it's unfortunately one of the things you have to go through if you're a candidate for a high office, and Speaker of the House is third in command, more or less. You've got the president, the vice president, and then the Speaker of the House. That's the pecking order.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate that both Renee Elmers and Kevin McCarthy have had to go through this.
Yeah. Well,
that didn't affect my opinion. I don't think it affected the opinions of any of the members of Congress who are going to vote yesterday or who will vote in the future.
Sure.
But going through that kind of ringer, that's got to affect you mentally.
Oh, no question.
In your decision process as to whether you want to go through all that.
Yeah, and I even hesitated to bring it up because I hate the rumor and innuendo. We're dealing with some of that on the state level down here, and it's like, you know what? I know sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire, or whatever, but sometimes I feel like the media, in an attempt to get clicks on their stories or whatever, gets ahead of the game on that. And look, the job of speaker is a tough job, often a thankless job. I mean, for all of us who had a lot of complaints about John Boehner's leadership, I don't think anybody thinks it's an easy job being Speaker of the House.
It's a thankless job. It is a very difficult job, and you literally have to divorce your wife, your kids, and your grandkids because of the time demands if you become Speaker of the House.
Mm. Well, if you could have...
It's not like being president where you have similar demands. At least the president, your family gets to live with you in the White House.
Sure, right.
But with Kevin McCarthy, by way of example, he sleeps on his couch in his office at night.
Mm-hmm.
And so his family's in California. He would be here. And the same kind of story could be said about a lot of potential candidates for speaker who would make very good speakers. But at the same time, do you really want the kind of person who would have to, in effect, divorce himself from his family?
Yeah. Well, if you could have anyone, if you could just wave a magic wand and install a Speaker of the House, who do you think is most prepared to do that job, can unify the conference? Who would you want if you could pick anybody?
Well, the people that I would want are conservatives. And the Tuesday group, which is the liberal caucus within the Republican members, it doesn't seem to get much press, but they pull us to the left just as hard as they can on moral issues, on open borders and amnesty, on irresponsible spending, you name it. They would probably veto anyone who shares the values that we share in Alabama, and for that matter, the values of Americans who love their country and believe that we are great because of our founding fathers' wisdom and the foundational principles that they bestowed upon us. But having said that, Marsha Blackburn out of Tennessee would be excellent. Tom Price out of Georgia would be excellent. Jim Jordan out of Ohio would be excellent. Daniel Webster and Jason Chaffetz, Daniel Webster out of Florida, Jason Chaffetz out of Utah would both be very good. They're the ones who were challenging for the speaker's race yesterday until the election was pulled out from underneath them. Jeb Henschling out of Texas would be good. I mean, there are dozens of people who would be very, very good as a speaker. Convincing them to run and to do the job is one thing, and then if they decide to run, convincing say, the liberals in the Republican conference to live with a conservative, that's going to be very challenging.
How many people would you say are in that Tuesday group, the more liberal group? Because there's about 40 of you guys in the House Freedom Caucus, the staunch
Probably
conservative.
about 50.
Okay, so maybe a little bit more than numbers than you guys have in that group. Interesting.
Yes.
The name that is coming up the most right now as at least from the media's perspective, a consensus-type candidate would be Paul Ryan. Now, as you mentioned, the time commitments of being Speaker for a guy who's got 3 small children living in Wisconsin, he's more of a policy wonk, doesn't really like the political side of this, raising money and all that, which is a big part of being Speaker. And you have also expressed, in our previous conversation, you said you saw Paul Ryan as perhaps more of a moderate than a staunch conservative. What do you think about the possibility of a Paul Ryan speakership?
Well, Paul, in the overall political spectrum, I think moderate is the right place to put him. Within the Republican Party confines, he's got some liberal leanings on amnesty and open borders type issues. He is, if you believe in the Heritage Foundation and the principles that they look at in evaluating our voting records through their sister organization, Heritage Action, Paul Ryan's got a fairly liberal voting record by Heritage Action evaluation standards. And then if you look at his budget, in the 2012 elections, Paul Ryan was getting eviscerated by the national news media because they said his budget was heartless. Well, his budget didn't balance for 26 years, a quarter of a century. Now, that's not a conservative position. I don't think we can last 26 years without a balanced budget, without us getting our financial house in order, short of us going through a debilitating insolvency and bankruptcy. So as only once conservatives like myself and some others around the country were able to cajole Paul Ryan into being more aggressive, where we're able to get him to propose budgets that would balance in a decade, 10 years, which is also somewhat wishful thinking because you have to make all sorts of assumptions for that to hold true. And so I don't think he's a conservative as we in the state of Alabama would define the term conservative. But I do think if he were to run, he could cobble together the votes necessary. The one thing I would really like to see him or any speaker candidate do is commit to ending this top-down dictatorial leadership system that we've had, where if you don't vote exactly like the leadership wants on the House floor or on committees, you're at risk of being stripped of your committee assignments or stripped of your chairmanships or denied your eating privileges in the members' lounge or denied the opportunity to go on congressional delegation trips to military facilities with your other members. There's all sorts of retaliation that has gone on against members who were doing nothing more than voting what they thought was in the best interest of their country. And so I want an anti-retaliation rule, and any speaker's candidate that promised me that he will push that through, well, that's going a long ways. Now, I say that not having been retaliated against, but I've seen members who have been retaliated against, and I've seen the venom that results, the animosity, and how that plants the seed for dissent for years to come.
We're talking to Congressman Mo Brooks from Alabama's 5th Congressional District. Congressman, I hate to play into a media narrative, but it does seem like sometimes we watch Republicans and in D.C. and we seem to be at each other's throats a lot on both sides. Conservatives are frustrated, I think rightfully so. Others are frustrated at the conservatives. And meanwhile, somehow, and I don't know how, Nancy Pelosi seems to have been very effective over the years with keeping her conference together. Now, I have a belief that it's always going to be.
No, she's had significant dissent too.
So it hasn't. So that is a media narrative. It's not really. That's not the case that she's always had them together. I was going to ask how she's done it and why we're having trouble. Yeah.
I have talked to a number of Democrats who have a very strong dislike of Nancy Pelosi and the way in which she heads up the minority caucus right now, or while she was House Speaker. And bear in mind that she has had a significant number of defections from her elections for Speaker on the Democrat side. But see, you got to understand the national news media. The national news media is Democrat, left wing, period. Now, there are some exceptions, but overall, 90% of them favor the left side of the aisle, and they do so in a visceral way. Mm-hmm. And so they try to highlight whatever disagreements there are within the Republican conference and minimize those same kinds of disagreements in the Democratic conference. And I'll give you an example. The biggest, deepest, most emotional political split in America right now is between Muslims and Jews, okay? And that's at the heart of the Democratic Party, because you've got those people who are pro-Israel being attacked openly and behind the scenes by those people who are pro-Palestinian. And you can break it down on a religious basis, geographic basis, however you want to. Now, how often do you see the news media focusing on the discord between those two groups, both of which are big players in the Democratic Party ranks?
Yeah, I haven't heard that at all.
That the pro-Israel forces are slowly but surely figuring out that the Democratic Party is abandoning them, and they're coming to the Republican Party. But that shift is not yet complete, and the media doesn't focus on it at all. You're right.
That is fascinating. You know, I've never really considered that, but both of those those are certainly part of the Democratic coalition, or have been over the years. Both of those groups.
In other parts of the world, they're literally killing each other and torturing each other in other parts of the world, and it's to a large degree religious based. That
is fascinating. I wish I had a good follow-up question on that, because I'd like to explore that more, but I'm going to have to think on that, because I just never really have considered that. It's interesting. You know, real quick, back to the speaker's race real quick. I hate to get into the process because people are more concerned about policy and things like that, and I try to be. But what is the process from here? I mean, it seems like mass chaos. What happens? Where do we go from here?
Well, there is no chaos. We're operating just as we have always operated. The House addresses problems facing our country. We vote on those bills. They go to the Senate, and they die. And that's the frustrating part about being the House of Representatives. But yesterday we were voting on legislation, voting on motions by the Democrats to kill the Benghazi committee before its report is complete. Today we're going to vote on legislation relating to oil exports by the United States of America. I just got through having a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing, Science, Space, and Technology hearing yesterday. Similarly had a number of hearings. So there has been no change that I can discern in how the House operates.
Right.
Now, the news media is, again, keep in mind they're left-wing. They like the word chaos, but there's been no change in the operation of the House. John Boehner is still Speaker.
How long from now do you expect that, or for what period of time do you expect this race to play out? Is this the kind of thing where here pretty quickly we're going to see folks come together and make a decision inside the conference on who's going to be the next speaker, and then maybe a vote? I know initially the timeline was like end of this month or something like that. Do you think that's still realistic?
We will probably see a solution in one of these two time frames, either in November of this year or in January of 2017. John Boehner may stay on as Speaker for the remainder of this term. After all, he did quit midterm when he had run for 2 years.
That's true. What effect, if any, do you think that this is going to have on the debt limit negotiations coming up?
Well, I'm not that focused on there being negotiations so much as I'm focused on the House of Representatives passing legislation that addresses not only the debt limit but also the underlying problem, which are these out-of-control deficits and accumulated debt that the Comptroller General of the United States of America and the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office repeatedly warn us are unsustainable, which is another way of saying, guys, if you don't get your financial house in order, we're going to go the way of Greece. We're going to have a debilitating insolvency and bankruptcy, with one big exception. We don't have anyone who will bail us out. So I think the House ought to be the financially responsible adult party in the room and propose a bill that increases the debt ceiling contingent on our addressing some of the underlying causes of these deficits, or perhaps being very bold, which might be my personal preference, passing a substantive balanced budget constitutional amendment that will prevent this problem from arising in perpetuity, which seems to be the direction that we're going.
Well, Congressman, we just, as always, appreciate your efforts out there. You represent your constituents as good as anybody in the country, and just on behalf of conservatives around the state, thank you for what you do. We look forward to having you back on the program soon.
Thank you for your kind remarks, and keep helping the people understand the truth.
You got it. All right, that's Congressman Mo Brooks. Cliff Sims, Yellowhammer Radio. Will be back in just a minute.
This is Yellowhammer Radio with Hammer Radio.